to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 47, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. The saga of the Harrelson bag continues. It's still not finished. And that has absolutely nothing to do with the designer or the pattern. It is completely user error. I did not read the pattern properly, and I did not have the correct size hardware. I need 3/4 inch hardware, and I know that's going to be impossible to find locally, so I went ahead and ordered some from Noodlehead. It is on its way to me, but until it gets here, that project is stalled. It's about half done, and I know it won't take long to finish it, so I'm looking forward to getting that done before the end of August. I am working on a baby quilt and an I Spy quilt for one of my cousin's children. Her son had his second baby. His wife delivered it, obviously. And I hadn't made a quilt for the first child. She was the very first grandchild that was born, and I wasn't on the ball back then. So I'm making her an I Spy quilt. She's 3, and I'm making a baby quilt for the baby. The baby has arrived. She arrived last weekend, so I need to get my butt in gear and finish those 2 quilts and get them sent off to Ohio. I did something fun and unusual this week. I took a painting class. So I am involved in our local community group, which is called the Mountain Brook Homestead Foundation. Our community where we live is called Mountain Brook, and the old schoolhouse campus, which has the original 1927 schoolhouse and a 50s era library building on it, belonged to the organization, and I'm the chairman of the fundraising committee, so it's my job to go out and round up donations to keep the organization afloat. And one of the ways that we do that is we offer classes. So I will teach sewing classes there every couple of months. I taught a canning class a couple of weeks ago. We made pickles. My friend Sunny, who went to Spokane with my other friend Robin, is a nationally known artist. She's an oil painter, and she offered to teach an oil painting class. 6 of us gathered at her studio. She lives up the road from me a couple miles. We gathered at her studio on Wednesday. It was an absolutely gorgeous day. High 70s, low 80s, not a cloud in the sky. And we painted outside, which is one of her specialties, painting on plein air. And she had us choose a view or an object or some part of the landscape that we wanted to paint. And then she taught us the basics of oil painting. So I did a view looking northwest over our valley into Whitefish and Lion Mountain. And I will tell you that I haven't painted with oils since my freshman high school art class in 1984. But I thoroughly enjoyed myself. We painted from about 9 o'clock in the morning until noon, and then finished up after lunch. I did complete my painting. I signed it. I went shopping for a frame in Sunny's basement, and I came home with a framed oil painting, which is now hanging in my house. I doubt that I will take up oil painting as a regular hobby, but I did really enjoy myself. I loved mixing the different colors and trying to capture the light. It was a little bit hazy out there because of wildfire smoke this time of year. That's not uncommon. But I enjoyed myself enough that I could see myself taking my easel out to the garden and doing another painting. It's very relaxing. And I do think it's important to stretch ourselves creatively and get out of our comfort zones and explore other media. And I have done that. I popped into the quilt store yesterday, and the store owner wanted to know why I wasn't taking the Claudia Donnell embroidery class, machine embroidery, and I kind of laughed to myself, and I thought I can only do one unfamiliar technique a week, and I was not prepared to learn machine embroidery on my 880 because I haven't even tried out that module yet. So I might end up in a Claudia Donnell class next year, but it's going to be a while yet. My friend Tara was in the class, and Tara and I don't live that far from each other, but we have a terrible time trying to get together because our schedules are so busy. And I haven't seen her for several months, so it was good to catch up with her, and she's already got Sew Expo 2025 on her calendar, and we're going to make that trip together again. We did that in 2023, and I'm looking forward to having her along. I made one last batch of zucchini bread yesterday. I think that's it for this season. We're going to be getting tomatoes in another week or two, and I have to make 50 quarts of salsa and 50 quarts of tomato sauce. So that will be occupying my time well into September. In today's episode, we're going to finish up discussing presser feet. I still have a few that I want to talk about, although this episode probably won't be as long as the first presser foot episode, but we are going to cover a few more specialty feet, so let's get into it. The first one I want to talk about is the buttonhole foot, and this comes in a couple of different flavors. If you like to be old school and make your buttonholes manually, there is a regular buttonhole foot that allows you to control the sewing of your buttonholes. Most of them also allow for the insertion of cord if you want to do a corded buttonhole. I typically don't use this buttonhole foot. I really like the buttonhole foot that has a slide on it. And this type of buttonhole foot often allows you to put the actual button in the rear of the foot. And there's a sensor that enables the machine to create a buttonhole that is exactly the perfect length for the button that you've chosen. That way there's no guesswork on how long to make your buttonhole. If you're making more than one buttonhole, say on the placket of a blouse or a shirt, and you want all the buttonholes to be identical, this is the buttonhole foot to use. If you have a vintage sewing machine, you may also have a buttonhole attachment. And I've never used one of these, although they're fairly ubiquitous. They are all over thrift stores and vintage stores, and I have several in my collection. Greist was a company that made a lot of buttonhole attachments, and they typically have templates that you drop into the machine, drop into the buttonhole attachment. So if you wanted to make a keyhole buttonhole or another kind of buttonhole, you would simply choose the correct template, drop it into the attachment, and off you go. If you're making buttonholes, you might also want the button foot, which is a specialized foot that allows you to sew buttons onto your garment with your sewing machine so that you're not doing them by hand. The one for my Bernina has a little finger that sticks out between the toes of the foot, and that enables you to vary the height of the shank, the thread shank that you want to sew with your buttonholes. If you don't need a thread shank, that will flip up and out of the way. Some button sew-on feet will also do snaps and other types of fasteners. Now we're going to get into some of the fun decorative stitch feet. If you do any kind of satin stitching or decorative stitching where you have thread building up on the surface of the fabric, you'll want a satin stitch foot or an embroidery foot. And there is some overlap in gray areas here, and I'll get into that in a minute. But a satin stitch foot has a groove or an indentation in the sole of the foot that allows it to ride over that built-up thread. And even if you're not doing a satin stitch, some decorative stitches are dense enough that you'll want that groove in the sole of your foot so that it rides over those decorative stitches as they're formed. My favorite embroidery foot is a clear foot. And a lot of these feet that I've been talking about come in solid metal versions as well as clear versions. Sometimes you'll want the solid metal version. I think those do a better job of holding the fabric. But sometimes you'll want a clear version so that you can see what you're doing. And when I'm doing any kind of zigzag on applique or anything like that. I really prefer to be able to see what I'm doing, and I like the open toe clear embroidery foot that I have for my machine. The open toe just allows you to see what you're doing a little more clearly, and again, that's going to be personal preference. The reason I said that there was some gray area and some overlap is because when I said embroidery foot, I'm sure some of you thought I was going to talk about a hopping foot. And a hopping foot or a darning foot certainly can be used for free motion embroidery. It can be used for free motion quilting. It can be used for darning, so let's go there next. The free motion embroidery foot or darning foot has a vertical spring in it and either an oval or a circular sole on the foot, and that vertical spring keeps the sole of that foot on the fabric to prevent flagging, and flagging is when the fabric bounces up and down as you're sewing. So you want that foot to hold that fabric level while the needle is moving up and down. Again, I'm probably not doing a great job explaining this, so you might want to look up a YouTube video on an embroidery foot or a darning foot or a hopping foot. I've seen them called by all three of those names. This is also the foot that you'll use for free motion quilting if you're quilting on your domestic machine. These come in a lot of variations. I have seen them where the sole is a circular metal piece. I have seen them where the sole is plastic. I have seen them where the sole is a semicircle rather than a full circle. I have seen them where there is something like an echo clip on the bottom of the sole that allows you to do echo quilting around existing motifs or previously quilted lines. So there are a variety of different styles of free motion quilting feet, and you can find exactly the one you need for your application or the one that you like to use the most. In addition to the free motion quilting feet, you might want to invest in a ruler foot. If you do any ruler work on your domestic machine, the ruler foot looks a lot like a free motion quilting foot, but it doesn't bounce up and down. It doesn't have that vertical spring in it. What happens is that round sole stays stationary on top of the fabric, but the sides of that circular part of the sole are higher and thicker, and they are meant to ride along the edge of a 1/4-inch acrylic quilting ruler. When using the ruler foot, it's very important that you do not put your ruler in place until after you have dropped the presser foot, because if you put your ruler in place and then drop the presser foot and it hits that ruler, it will either break your ruler or break your foot or throw your machine out of time, or all three. If you do a lot of work with vinyl or leather, you might want to get a Teflon foot. And in fact, you might want to get not only the Teflon foot, but the Teflon needle plate. Having those on your machine will make sewing on vinyl and leather a lot more pleasant. It is possible to put a piece of transparent tape on the base of on the sole of your presser foot if you don't have a Teflon foot. Putting that piece of transparent tape on the sole of the foot will help it slide over the sticky materials more easily. But truly, having the Teflon foot in combination with the Teflon needle plate is a game changer. Depending on what kind of machine you have, you may be able to get a general purpose Teflon foot, and you may also be able to get the more specialty feet like zipper feet in a Teflon version as well. For those of you who do a lot of sewing on leather or with leather, a roller foot, as its name implies, has a wheel on it that rolls over the surface of the fabric. Although in addition to using it on leather, you can also use it on thicker home deck fabrics and in thicker quilting projects. So that could be a very versatile presser foot attachment. Now we're getting into some real specialty feet. So the binding attachment feet allow you to attach either pre-folded binding or unfolded binding, depending on what the application is. And these are attachments that have a funnel. They're funny looking attachments. On the Bernina machines, they are actually a 2-part attachment. So you have the binder foot and then you've got the binder attachment, and they work in conjunction. You feed the pre-folded bias tape or the unfolded bias tape, depending on which attachment you're using, into that funnel, and it rides underneath the foot, and the foot sews it along the edge of the fabric. If you have trouble attaching bias binding, this might be a helpful presser foot and attachment for you. I actually have this attachment for my cover stitch machine, not for my sewing machine. And finally, the last foot I'm going to talk about today is the ruffler foot. If you have a lot of trouble getting even gathers and you do a lot of sewing where you need ruffles or pleated fabric, the ruffler foot might be the one that you need. And watching these in action is fascinating. I have one for my vintage necky, and I've used it on that machine, and it's really entertaining to watch it. You can set most rufflers so that they will form a pleat or a gather every certain number of stitches. So let's say every 4 stitches or every 6 stitches or every 8 stitches. And that's how you control the amount of gathering or the amount of pleating. I've seen these used to make ruffling or ruffled edges on pillows or on baby quilts. It's a specialty foot for sure, but sometimes investing in those more expensive presser feet will actually save you a lot of time and money over the long run, and especially a lot of aggravation. That covers the presser feet that I wanted to talk about. I know that there are some ultra specialty presser feet out there, and my advice is to get the catalog for your manufacturer and find out what feet are available for your machine. If you're curious about a particular machine, visit your dealer. I have found that dealers are often more than happy to demo a particular foot because it's also in their best interest that you're happy with the sale. So if you know what the foot looks like and what it does before you purchase it, then it's a win-win for everyone. When I bought my Necky BF, my little Italian sports car sewing machine that I use for quilt piecing, the woman who sold it to me told me that it had belonged to her great aunt, who was a professional seamstress. And that rather blew my mind. How could she sew professionally with nothing but a straight stitch machine? But the more I learned about machines, the more I realized that oftentimes it's the presser feet that do the heavy lifting. It's the presser feet that allow you to get the specialty effects. It's not necessarily the sewing machine itself. So I hope this has been useful. I hope that you are inspired, perhaps, to try some new and different presser feet, or get out the ones that came with your machine and start experimenting with them. You might be surprised at what your machine is capable of doing. That's going to finish it up for today's episode. We've had a couple of longer episodes recently, so I don't mind cutting this one a little bit shorter. I'm going to be traveling next week, so I doubt very much that I am going to get a podcast up on August 27th, but that'll give you a week to catch up on your listening. And I will be back after that with some new and interesting interviews and some new and interesting episodes. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about, feedback is always welcome. I can be reached at janet@janetzabo.com. I can also be reached through fan mail, which is a feature of Buzzsprout where I host my podcast, although I can't reply directly to fan mail comments. So just be aware that if you send fan mail, I appreciate it very much, but I won't be able to respond directly to it. So if you're looking for an answer to something, email me at janet@janetzabo.com. Show notes for every episode can be found at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com, and that links to my blog where I post 3 or 4 times a week about what's going on here in Montana. That's where you can see pictures of my sewing projects, pictures of our animals. One of my broody hens had chicks a couple of weeks ago, so there have been some chick pictures up there. And there is also a link to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website if you're interested in checking out any of my knitting patterns. Hopefully by the next podcast episode, I will have finished that Harrelson bag and possibly a quilt or two. I will keep you posted on what's happening in my sewing room. And until our next visit together, I hope that you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.